On September 11th, 2001, dawn emerged under a clear, brilliant blue sky. Within hours, the United States would suffer its darkest day. Known simply as 9/11, 2,977 men, women, and children were senselessly killed at the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and aboard Flight 93 that crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Channeling their grief into action, Mary Fetchet and the late Beverly Eckert established Voices of September 11th. Drawing upon her professional background as a clinical social worker and first-hand experience as a mother of a victim, Mary recognized the challenges families faced in accessing information. Through Voices, she was committed to provide the support that families needed and deserved to help them heal and build resilience in their lives. As a victim's advocate, Mary became a subject matter expert in intelligence reform. Working alongside other families, she met with elected officials, held vigils, press conferences, and testified before Congress. Their advocacy efforts championed the establishment of the 9/11 Commission that led to sweeping intelligence reforms to ensure a safer country. Social work practices and a commitment to providing continuity of care permeates Voices' work. The organization pioneered a wide array of programs, including over 180,000 hours of social service support, hundreds of workshops, webinars, trainings, and symposiums. Voices established weekly teleconference support groups that connected 9/11 families living around the world. Voices staff was integral in assisting thousands of responders and survivors suffering from 9/11-related illnesses, applying for medical and mental health treatment through the World Trade Center Health Program. The 9/11 Living Memorial Project was created to help families commemorate the 2,977 lives lost and document stories of survivors. Voices staff provided the emotional support they needed to select photographs and personal mementos to memorialize their loved one in a meaningful way. Today, the Living Memorial is a core component of the In Memoriam exhibit at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. Voices has become a trusted international advocate and is honored to work with their partners to champion victim services and victims' rights. Through long-standing public-private partnerships with like-minded subject matter experts and professional organizations, Voices assists communities impacted by mass violence, such as Parkland, Newtown, and Charleston. Voices Center for Resilience was built on the foundation of lessons learned while providing long-term support for the 9/11 community. Today, Voices is an internationally recognized nonprofit organization, sharing resources to help individuals and communities heal and build resilience. With your help, Voices' legacy will live on through support services, innovative programs, and the expansion of the Wolf Gruber Institute Digital Resource Library. Along with their national and international partners, Voices strives to promote mental health care and wellness for all those impacted by tragedy in the United States and abroad.
Hello and good evening. I'm Sam Connell. I'm one of the librarians here at New Canaan Library, and we are so delighted to have you here today to join in this very special program. Tonight, we have Mary Fetchet, the founding director of Voices Center for Resilience, and she will present the program, A 20-Year Journey from 9/11 to today. We also would like to welcome you to the library, to the Curtis Gallery, where we have a very special exhibit that we put together with Voices Center for Resilience. And we have a poster display that's educational, just to share a lot of the events of 9/11 2001. And we also have a selected group of art pieces from the Silver Mine Art Show, Voices of Reflection, which is now on view, and we encourage you to go and take a look. We have access to the Living Memorial Project that you heard a little bit about during that video, and we also have a collaborative community journal, and we encourage you to write down your memories and your reflections. So without further delay, I would like to introduce Mary Fetchet to you. Mary is a resident of New Canaan for 33 years, and today she's going to talk about the evolution of her personal experience, her advocacy efforts, and how the loss of her son on September 11th and the needs of the other grieving families led to the creation of the Voices Center for Resilience. In the last 20 years, Mary has dedicated her time to providing long-term support for victims' families, responders, and survivors, and in assisting communities impacted by other tragedies. I was very lucky to get to know Mary over the last few weeks, and she's an absolute tour de force, and we are so lucky to have her here today with us this evening. Thank you, Mary.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's going to take me just a minute, I think, to get a slide deck up here. So a little patience. So I just have one more. Here we go. Okay, so Sam, thank you so much for the kind introduction and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank everyone at the New Canaan Library for inviting me to participate in tonight's program. As Sam said, New Canaan's been our home for over 33 years now, and one of the things that impressed us about New Canaan, beyond the beauty of the town, was the strong family values and the sense of community. And certainly after 9/11, we found firsthand how the support of our friends and neighbors in New Canaan carried our family through our darkest hours. This evening, I'd like to reflect on my 20-year journey, as Sam said, from 9/11 to today, and how the loss I suffered of our son, Brad, really transformed my life in many ways. On 9/11, our 24-year-old son, Brad, was working on the 89th floor of the North Tower. He was working for Keith Barrett and Woods. And I was working as a clinical social worker in Milford, Connecticut. And then my husband, Frank, was working at IBM. So when the first plane hit, Brad called my husband at work, and then he left me this message at home.
Hey Mom, it's Brad. Just wanted to call and let you know, I'm sure that you heard, or maybe you haven't heard, but a plane crashed into World Trade Center 1. We're fine, we're in World Trade Center 2. I'm obviously alive and well over here, but obviously a pretty scary experience. I saw a guy fall out of probably the 91st story, all the way down. So you're welcome to give a call here. I think we'll be here all day. I'm not sure if the firm's going to shut down for the day or what, but give me a call back later. I called Dad to let him know. Love you.
Brad was one of 2,977 citizens that died in the terrorist attacks on 9/11 in New York City and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and the Pentagon. And still today, hearing Brad's message, it's really a double-edged sword. And I'm sure those of you that know Brad felt the same way. But as his mother, I love hearing his voice, but I certainly hate knowing the outcome and how he suffered. That will always stay with me forever.
Hey Mom, it's Brad.
Brad was the oldest of our 3 sons. At the time, our son Wes was 20 years old and he was attending Bucknell University. And our son Chris was 13 and he was attending middle school. And Brad was kind and compassionate. He was a talented but understated athlete. And he was really embarking on, his career at KBW, who was just a family to him. So the loss of Brad was devastating, certainly to our family. In the days following the attacks, our home became a gathering place. Many of you are on the line may have been at our house. And Brad's friends in New York City filed, I think he had over a dozen missing person reports, and they were traveling to hospitals and so forth looking for him. Our friends and neighbors brought food. They answered the endless stream of phone calls and ran errands for us. And then once we recognized that Brad had perished, they helped us plan Brad's memorial service and housed our very large family. I'm one of 8, and they lived across the country. And so when they traveled into New Canaan, they were generously welcomed at our friends' homes. We started in the weeks following the attacks. I certainly had a range of emotions: shock, fear, despair, and trying to come to terms with the unimaginable loss of Brad. But I felt really out of touch here in Connecticut because all of the decisions were being made in New York City. So my first trip to New York City was to attend a memorial service that Keith Bretton Woods had arranged. And we followed that by a visit to the Family Assistance Center that was originally set up at the Armory and then later along the West Side Highway. It was a surreal experience traveling down the streets of New York. And for any of you that were there, you know, we viewed processions of people gathered at spontaneous memorials, missing person posters lined on fences, firefighters and policemen resting alongside the roads, cars, motorcycles, and trucks, you know, with flags, American flags. Families were from 93 countries, and so there were thousands of people coming to the Family Assistance Center from around the world. So there were language barriers. I mean, think about people coming in that weren't familiar with New York, looking for their loved one. You know, they were holding photographs. We all had that look in our eyes that of shock, you know, but I have to say, there was something comforting about being there. We immediately connected with those other family members, and we had this common shared experience, and it was really an unspoken bond. My advocacy work really started shortly after 9/11, when I began holding weekly meetings in our home. Our Congressman Christopher Shays at the time had attended all of the funerals of his constituents, and I met him at Brad's funeral. And he helped me connect with the families in Connecticut. He had put together a book, I think it was over 600 pages, on all the how-tos, how to file for a death certificate, you know, how to, all of the agencies and organizations that were created to provide support and so forth. And so those weekly meetings in our home, that's where I met Beverly Eckert. And Beverly lost her husband, Sean Rooney, and lived in Stamford, Connecticut. And so it was soon after that that we co-founded Voices of September 11th. We really immediately recognized from the meetings in our home, my home, that families needed information. They needed support navigating very complicated issues. And they needed someone to advocate for themselves, on behalf of them, because many of these women had lost their husbands, and the last thing that they could do was to go into New York City. They were really trying to care for their families and their small children. So in 2002, we secured our first office space. It was actually in a small Victorian home on Main Street. And then once again, my friends stepped in and they helped by donating furniture, volunteering, and certainly sharing their time and their talents with us. In those early meetings in New York City with Mayor Giuliani, Governor Pataki, Eliot Spitzer, Senator Schumer, and Hillary Clinton, I met other like-minded family members who had similar concerns. And we created several coalitions working on a number of important issues. First and foremost, we wanted to know if our loved ones were dead or alive, and if their bodies would be recovered in the rubble of the collapsed towers. We also wanted a memorial built at the World Trade Center site, which we considered sacred ground, to memorialize those that were lost and to tell the unfettered truth about 9/11. In addition, we worried about the safety and security of our nation and had mounting questions, really just from reading the newspaper, about systemic government failures that allowed 19 terrorists to hijack 4 airplanes simultaneously and murder thousands of innocent citizens. So Beverly and I joined other 9/11 family members to advocate on several issues. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those this evening. During the early meetings in New York City, Mayor Giuliani and later Mayor Bloomberg would pull together all of the agencies that were working on a number of issues. And that's really where I met Dr. Charles Hirsch, who was the New York City Chief Medical Examiner. He had the monumental task, as you can see from the picture. This was one of the largest crime scenes that's ever occurred in the history of our country. And he had the monumental task of both collecting and identifying human remains that were found, on and around the World Trade Center site. And at the end of the day, he had actually 20,000 human remains and had to collect DNA samples from family members to make those matches. But at the time when we were meeting with the families, they were very fearful that a police officer was going to show up at their door unannounced and make that and tell them about the notification from the medical examiner. So we wanted more control over that situation. So at the time, Dr. Hirsch made this commitment that he was going to continue his work as long as it took to make sure that all of these remains were identified and that these families were notified. But it was through my personal experience and what I heard from these other families that motivated me to advocate on behalf of the families to standardize and streamline the process where families were notified. So we wanted Dr. Hirsch to create a system where families could decide if they wanted to be notified, how they wanted to be notified, and when they wanted to be notified. And nearly 20 years later, we still have a longstanding relationship with Dr. Hirsch, has since died, but with his predecessor now, Dr. Sampson, and many of their team that have worked on this issue over the last 20 years. Still today, there's 1,100 families that have never been notified of remains, and they still have 7,000 human remains in their possession, but they are continuing to use advanced DNA processes to help, make that commitment to the families that they were going to continue this effort till the end. On June 11th of 2002, I was invited to speak at a rally in Washington, D.C. And we were advocating on behalf of the establishment of a bipartisan independent commission. It was really, as I said earlier, clear from just reading the newspaper that the success of the terrorists in attacking our country was really due to our government agencies not being prepared. I knew little about politics and I avoided at all costs speaking publicly. And naively, I believed that we would hold the rally, the commission would be established, and that would be that. But following the rally, we visited congressional offices, and we were really faced with the grim reality that many of our elected officials and the administration had no interest in an independent investigation. For example, when speaking with a congressman from a southern state, he commented to me, "I would really like to help you, ma'am, but you are not my constituent. And besides, New York City," that was a New York City thing, 9/11 was. So as you can imagine, his response, well, number one, shocked me, but it also infuriated me and motivated me. It was hard to fathom that an attack on our country that, and the loss of, thousands of innocent lives didn't warrant a full investigation. So our first visit to Washington was certainly a wake-up call for me, and it was a turning point for me personally. I realized then that I had a moral obligation on behalf of my son and the others who died to make sure their lives were not lost in vain. Furthermore, I had two younger sons and a lot of friends working in New York City, and I was worried about the safety of our nation. I didn't want another mother to walk in my shoes. Shortly after, we established the 9/11 Family Steering Committee, and this was 12 very determined family members who made endless trips to Washington, D.C. We held rallies and vigils. We made phone calls. We faxed letters. I don't want to tell you my phone bill one month. I think it was $700 from faxing letters to the congressional offices. And then we visited the 100 senators and 435 representatives. And we had ongoing negotiations and meetings with the White House. As novices in Washington, I can tell you we made every mistake in the book. I mean, we got onto senator-only elevators. We traveled through from the tram, from the congressional offices to the Capitol building on member-only trams. I remember I was testifying before the Governmental Affairs and Homeland Security Committee, which Senator Lieberman led, and I interrupted him in the middle of, when he was speaking. I didn't know that you weren't supposed to do that. But we became outspoken advocates. We established relationships with the media. And through our research, we became, if you can imagine, subject matter experts in intelligence reform. I testified before Congress and the 9/11 Commission on 6 occasions. Now, my husband, who was holding down the fort at home, he was very supportive, but skeptical. And he fondly referred to us as the suffragettes, which I guess in retrospect we were. Some of the challenges that we faced in advocating for government reform began with navigating an established political system that we were unfamiliar with, educating ourselves about very complicated issues related to national security. In order to succeed, we had to remain bipartisan. We had to steer clear of special interest groups and conspiracy theorists. I think I have a file cabinet of conspiracy theorists that have written me over the years. We also built strong alliances with senators and representatives. Certainly Senator Lieberman and Senator Susan Collins and the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, Congressman Christopher Shays and Carolyn Maloney and Jane Harmon also were very strong advocates who supported our efforts, and we built a coalition over time. Once the 9/11 Commission was established, we also aligned with Governor Kane and Lee Hamilton, who I can't say enough good things about those wonderful men, and also the commissioners that we wanted to support their investigation. And then, of course, the following 2 congressional cycles where we wanted to make sure the recommendations were implemented, and then the following cycle to make sure that their recommendations were funded. We also wanted to advocate for the creation of the 9/11 Memorial. Similarly, there was a coalition that was established, the Coalition of 9/11 Families. But I served on the committee of the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, had a family advisory board. There were actually 9 different groups, the families being one of them, and I was a member. But the Coalition of 9/11 Families was really independent of that. We wanted to make sure that we had a good understanding of what the families wanted. We also wanted to have consensus, if that's even possible. First and foremost, we believed that the World Trade Center site was sacred ground. And as I mentioned, there's still 1,100 families that have never received remains. This really is their grave site still today. Advocating for an appropriate memorial was a long and arduous process. The World Trade Center site was in the middle of some of the most expensive real estate in New York City, and billions of dollars were at stake. As I mentioned, there were many stakeholder groups, and some of their goals conflicted with ours. They weren't, their priority was not necessarily preserving sacred ground and memorializing those that had died. And then, of course, there were frequent turnovers in the organization that headed the redevelopment of Lower Manhattan over the course of the time that the memorial was built. And I remember it was actually after the legislation was passed for the 9/11 Commission that it was easier to pass sweeping intelligence reform than it was to get the 9/11 memorial right. Along with other family members, we advocated for several important components that we wanted in the memorial. We wanted water to drown out the sound of the city. We wanted the footprints of the building where the building once stood to be preserved. We wanted the victims' names to be inscribed around the pools of water where you could touch their names. We wanted the survivor staircase where many people escaped to be preserved. We wanted the unidentified remains to be located between the North and South Tower. And as I mentioned earlier, we wanted the unfettered truth about 9/11 to be told. Most importantly, we wanted the faces, the names, and the stories of the 2,977 victims to be told. And when you think about 9/11, you sometimes might forget that this happened at 3 sites. And the wonderful thing about the 9/11 memorial is they're memorializing the people that died in Shanksville and also at the Pentagon. One of the major contributions that Voices made to the 9/11 Memorial Museum is our Living Memorial Project. It's a digital archive that commemorates the 2,977 lives that were lost. And it also documents stories of survivors and responders through a collection of over 87,000 photographs and personal keepsakes. And it was really around the time of the 5th anniversary, we realized that while the planning for the memorial was going on, families were really struggling because they weren't able to memorialize. And so before we started this project, one of our congressmen set up a meeting with Dr. Billington, who was the 13th Librarian of Congress. And I mean, that didn't mean anything to me, but I can tell you it was like seeing the Pope. They had several briefings before we, entered his office. And I have to say he was a wonderful, dignified man, and so compassionate and helpful. But when we explained our vision, he just put his hands to his head and he said, "You just don't realize you're cutting edge. Can you imagine if someone like you documented Civil War?" And I thought, what's he talking about? We're going to scan photographs, create this website, meet with the families. We're going to use social services practices to be able to provide the support that we needed. But also I could see the connection in many of these, when we met with these families, their loved ones worked at the same company. They lived in the same town. They played the same sport. So this was before Google. I was thinking, gee, wouldn't it be great if you could put in a keyword and everyone that played football in New Canaan, Connecticut would pop up. So, in retrospect, when I think back, I guess we were cutting edge at the time. But our staff, I just can't say enough about our wonderful staff. that took, large scanners and computers when you think about 2005. And they met with these families, and it was such a therapeutic process for them to be able to tell the story of their loved one in a way that was meaningful to them. And, with every photograph, they had a story. It was just, to be with them and hear them bear witness and tell those stories, it was just really an honor for us to work with the families. So what we did in that project was really meet the needs of the families, but we also made a major contribution to the 9/11 memorial. So when they were going through the planning process, I kept meeting with Alice Greenwald and showing her, just the wonderful things that these families were sharing with us. So today, the Living Memorial, as I said, is 87,000 photographs that were given to us, and they're on our website. So you can visit the 9/11 Living Memorial and read about the people that died that day. But we also shared copies with their permission to the 9/11 Memorial Museum. So if you go into the In Memoriam exhibit, you'll see most of that collection actually came from our small nonprofit organization. Now, since 9/11, over 4,700 responders and survivors have died. So for the 20th anniversary, we're also going to be working with those families. Of course, it's much easier today than it was back in 2005. People didn't have smartphones and their photographs were not digital. So we've started that process, and we're going to be announcing it more publicly soon. So when I think about some of our most meaningful work has really been providing support to the families. And we've worked with thousands of 9/11 families, survivors, and responders over the years. My social work background really guided the creation of what I see as a new paradigm in providing victim services. Because the government really, they come in for a year and provide funding to whatever organization is dealing with the families. And then, it's a responsibility of the community to really continue that support. We see it very differently. We recognize that people grieve, on their own time frame, in their own way. And still today, we're hearing from people for the first time. So it's really a holistic approach. We also see that, the advocacy was just as important as the support, because if they're not able to access resources and their needs are not being taken into consideration when decisions are being made, that's counterproductive to a person's healing. So, I think about the value that our staff really provides is that continuity of care. If somebody calls us, they do not have to tell us what they've gone through in the last 20 years. We know what they've gone through. We know what resources are available, and we are our expertise. We're able to provide answers to their questions and connect them with services. So on 9/11, I've said many times that 2,977 died, leaving behind families in 93 countries. What you might not know is that there were over 500,000 people that responded or survived. They lived, worked, or went to school in the area. Many of them have become sick because of their exposure to the toxins in the air. There's over 83,000 now that are in treatment for life-threatening illnesses. Their mental health conditions are in the top 10, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. So currently there's over 83,000 in treatment for these conditions. And then, as I mentioned earlier, over 4,700 have died since, leaving behind families because it's 20 years later without any kind of support. So we see the bereaved families as a growing population, as are the survivors and responders who have not been connected with an organization over the last 20 years. The other thing that we see really is their resilience and the importance of connecting them with each other. Peer-to-peer support and the research that we've done, is at the top of the list, and we do it in a different way because it's also facilitated by a mental health professional. So when I look back, I mentioned to someone recently, I very seldom look back because I have so much that I'm looking forward that has to be done. And so this anniversary is very different for me in the sense that I am looking back and reflecting on the work that we've done over the years. So when I think about September 11th, 2001, I could never have envisioned the journey that lie ahead. Advocacy work, I can tell you, it's tiring, both emotionally and physically. And there's many personal trade-offs that you have to make, being away from your family at a time that you're grieving, becoming a public figure, and risking the scrutiny of family, friends, and others who may have different beliefs. Balancing diplomacy and speaking out on issues that may be controversial, among others. Yet I have to say my advocacy work has been a catalyst for personal growth, and it's made me stronger and more resilient. I've had an opportunity to work alongside and collaborate with remarkable individuals from all walks of life who've dedicated their careers, many of them, to many of these causes. So the loss of my son on 9/11 will always be a hole in my heart. But it's really because of Brad and the others that my path in life has changed. And I remain passionate and committed to the work that we're doing. After Brad's death, we found his journal with a quote, and I really don't know where it came from. You can tell the character of a man by what he does for the man who can offer him nothing. And I could say that through my journey over the last 20 years, this quote, it's been demonstrated really time and time again by the inspiring selflessness of individuals, really, as I said, from all walks of life, who have stepped forward to help. Some of you on the line may have been at our art exhibit. The artists, the quilters, the people that have written songs, the clinicians, the doctors working now in the World Trade Center Health Program, the attorneys that are helping the responders and survivors have compensation so they can support their families. And then, of course, the attorneys that are trying to get to the bottom of holding the people responsible who were the perpetrators on 9/11. I have a very positive view of elected officials because my experience has been that they are very supportive, they're very educated, they're very committed and determined really to do what's right. And as I mentioned, the 9/11 commissioners, Governor Kane, Senator and Lee Hamilton, Tim Romer, all of those remarkable people that spent, a long period of time and continue to be out there talking about the reforms that were so important to making our country safer. We've also worked, with people around the country and around the world. Every month, we have a meeting with our international partners, and we're sharing information, we're sharing our expertise. We step in to help other communities when they need help. And then the other thing I'd have to say is, our staff, has been remarkable. Their dedication, is beyond, anything imaginable over the years. And then, of course, our board, our donors, people that have volunteered their time and helped us in so many ways. So I think, just in closing, looking beyond the 20th anniversary, we're really renewing our commitment to provide a lifetime of support for the 9/11 community. But as I said, helping these other communities, we've learned so much through the 9/11 families that we're working with, and how to heal, how to be resilient. And it's really through our work with our like-minded partners, whether they're working on, with the 9/11 families or working with other communities. It's really been an honor and privilege to get to know them, and we're working with them not just to share our expertise, but on projects where we're conducting research, or we're conducting training. So I really think, in many ways, I see our work as an opportunity and a responsibility to make a difference. And so it has been truly, a remarkable journey. And so I thank you for the opportunity to reflect. And this is a short version of what's happened over the last 20 years, but I think it gives you a good snapshot into the work that we're doing here at Voices Center for Resilience.
Thank you so much, Mary. I just, I think I speak for all of us when I say that you are such an inspiration, and how powerfully you are guided by love, and how tireless you've been to help and touch the lives of so many. So thank you. You're so generous with your energy and your time. And I'm just so grateful that you shared that with us today. For those of you with us, you're welcome to ask Mary any questions in the Q&A. In the meantime, I did want to ask you, Mary, if you could talk to us a little bit. I know you're leaving for New York tomorrow. I know there's a few events this week. Can you tell us a little bit about the symposium and how our attendees may be able to access some of the live stream events?
Now, the symposium, we really started that on the first anniversary. We realized that people were coming from around the country and around the world, to the anniversary event. So it really started with, the service providers, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, and so on and so forth. And it's grown as the needs have grown, the information that the families need. I think the thing that's unique about this year, it's really a compilation of all the work that we've done over the years. So we have, some of the congressional offices, Congressman Shays, Jane Harmon, Tim Romer are going to be speaking. We have another panel with Governor Kane and some of Senator Lieberman and Collins, and they're going to be talking about the 9/11 Commission. We have two gentlemen that were the first to respond in Afghanistan with a group of horse soldiers. We have the memorial. So it's in person. It's at the Marriott Downtown Hotel, which is just a block from the 9/11 Memorial. And it's on Thursday, September 9th. And Friday, September 10th, and it's in person, but it's also going to be broadcast online. So if somebody wants to tune into one or more of the presentations, they can just visit our website, voicescenter.org.
I also wanted to let some of the attendees know, some of our library members have asked me over the last few weeks about how to talk to younger children about 9/11 and some of the resources we have. I did want to let our attendees know that if you go to newcanaanlibrary.org on our 9/11 website, you'll see a lot of information about what Mary has spoken about this evening, but there are also resources there specifically for engaging families and talking to younger children about this topic. I was wondering also, Mary, if you'd be able to talk to us a little bit about your experiences with that.
Sam, I have to agree with you. And, I know that COVID, the social unrest, the collapse of the building, the Surfside building in Miami, and now the withdrawal from Afghanistan, all of that turmoil, it really, number one, it affects the adult in the home, which then ripples down to, the children in the home. So I think really talking to them, really understanding if they have concerns, to be able to talk about it, to make sure that they realize that they're, safe, they're here in New Canaan, you're here and are going to be available. But I think the most important thing is really understanding what they're thinking. Because if you jump to explaining something very complex, it's not going to be helpful. And I do think, I know when COVID hit, much of the work that we're doing with the 9/11 families on resilience, we took our tip sheets and modified them and distributed them because we really were concerned about the mental health issues, around, the isolation and the changes that we've all had over the last, I don't know, a year and a half due to COVID.
So we have time for one last question. Since many of our participants today are from the New Canaan Committee, although we have people from as far away as Oslo and Europe and across the world.
I think I know who that one is.
That person particularly wanted to give you a shout out. But I did want to ask you, being in New Canaan, if you could talk to us a little bit about the art exhibit that's on right now at Silvermine.
Yeah, the art exhibit really started because we have a woman that donated 2,300 pieces of mail art. She had done a call for art and she asked the artist to, sketch, draw, create a collage on an envelope and bring it to the post office on September 11th and have it stamped, 2001, or not 2001, 2002 and onward. So we have 2,300 pieces of mail art. And when Silvermine wanted to put those on display, those of us that have been at the organization for many years, I'm talking about Stephanie Landau here, we said, gee, we have, all these other items. We have quilts, we have children's artwork, we have a woman that we've worked with for 20 years from Seattle Art Project, and her students and her art colleagues every year have created artwork. And so we had a lot of that on exhibit. Also, John Coburn, a pen and ink artist that went around New York City. And, after 9/11, he loves New York City and he's from Toronto, Canada. He actually came and had some of his artwork on exhibit. So it's really a collection of what we have. And like I said, we're always moving forward. I think the art exhibit was one more example that we really have, extensive artwork that we have to catalog. And, and this is probably an exhibit that will expand at least the digital piece of it, but it also could travel to other locations.
So I
think the other thing, Sam, I'd say is artwork is just as healing for the artist as it is for the people that it's given to. But I do think the messages of hope and healing that these artists, conveyed, their expression of, comfort and, to our families was really remarkable. And that continues today. We're still receiving artwork.
I was lucky enough to be able to see it, and it's really powerful. I encourage everyone to go and to take a look. I was also lucky enough to get to work with a lot of your staff, and I understand why you commend them so highly. They're an incredible group
Yeah,
of
we're
people.
very lucky.
So I just want to thank you for your time, and I really appreciate that you share such a powerful message of resilience, hope, and healing. So thank you so much, Mary, for tonight. I really appreciate it.
And Sam, if I could just say one thing, you know, my husband says it all the time, it's faith, family, and friends. And, you know, my friends and family have really been important to me.
Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This has been a really wonderful evening. We hope you all enjoy the rest of your night.